After 40 years of silence, I finally had the courage to call my mother. She told me I was a stranger. But what I discovered in a hidden box revealed a secret far more painful than rejection. Make sure you subscribe, because the final, heartbreaking moment of the story will leave you absolutely speechless. There's a peculiar kind of quiet that settles in on your 63rd birthday when you're alone. It's not peaceful, it's heavy, filled with the ghosts of unspoken words and the weight of years gone by. My daughter, Sarah, had called earlier, her voice bright and full of love, telling me my granddaughter, Lily, had made me a card that was a masterpiece of glitter and glue. I smiled, I thanked her, I told her I loved them more than life itself. But after we hung up, the quiet returned, and this time it had an edge. 40 years. It had been 40 years since I'd spoken to my mother. I was 23 when I walked out of her perfectly ordered, suffocatingly pristine house. I was in love with Michael, a man with calloused hands, a past he wasn't proud of, and a heart bigger than anyone I'd ever known. My mother saw only his poverty and his mistakes. Her final words to me weren't screamed. They were delivered with the icy precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "If you walk out that door with him," she'd said, her voice barely a whisper, "you are no longer my daughter. You are dead to me." I walked. I built a life. A hard life at times, but an honest one. I raised Sarah. I held her hand as she raised Lily. I proved I could do it on my own. But I never managed to fill the hole my mother had carved in my heart that day. So on this birthday, I decided I was done with the silence. It was a debt I owed myself. Maybe not forgiveness, but closure. I called a distant cousin, endured the awkward pleasantries, and finally got the number. My finger hovered over the screen, trembling. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. What was I even expecting? A tearful reunion over the phone? An apology? A simple acknowledgement? I pressed the call button before I could lose my nerve. It rang 3 times, each one stretching into an eternity. Then a voice answered, thin and frail, like a dried leaf skittering across pavement. "Hello?" It was her. Older, weaker, but unmistakably her. I squeezed my eyes shut, picturing her face as it was 40 years ago. Stern, proud, unyielding. I took a breath, the air catching in my throat. "Hi, Mom." I managed to say, my own voice sounding foreign and shaky. A pause stretched across the line, thick with the silence of 4 decades. I could hear a clock ticking faintly in the background, marking the seconds of my life that were slipping away. Then the voice came back, polite, detached, and utterly clueless. "Eleanor, I'm sorry," she said, with the simple finality of a stranger. "I don't know anyone by that name." I thought being disowned was the most painful thing she could ever do to me. I was wrong. Being forgotten was infinitely worse, and as I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, the world tilting on its axis, I had a sickening feeling that this was only the beginning. What happened next changed everything. A turn of events so cruel, it made that phone call feel like a gentle tap on the shoulder before the real blow landed. You won't want to miss how this unfolds. The phone didn't so much fall as slide from my numb fingers, clattering onto the hardwood floor. For a long moment, I just stared at it. A black rectangle of silence on a sea of polished oak. I don't know anyone by that name. The words weren't just a rejection, they were an erasure. 40 years of my life, my marriage to Michael, the birth of my daughter, the joy of my granddaughter, all of it, wiped clean in a single polite sentence. My first thought was pure, unadulterated rage. Of course, this was her ultimate power play, to not even grant me the dignity of a fight, to simply pretend I never existed. It was so perfectly her, so devastatingly cruel. She had finally made good on her promise. I was dead to her, and now my name was the name of a ghost. But something didn't sit right. The voice on the phone hadn't been cold and sharp like the mother I remembered. It was hollow, empty. My hands were shaking, but I picked up the phone and dialed my cousin again. My voice was tight when she answered. "Barbara, it's Eleanor again. I think you might have given me the wrong number for my mother." There was a long sigh on the other end of the line. A sigh of pity. My stomach twisted. "Oh, honey," Barbara said, her voice gentle now. "It's the right number, but there's something you don't know. Your mother, she hasn't been herself for a long time. She's in a home, a place called Sunny Hills, just outside of town." She paused, and I knew the next words would change everything. "Eleanor, she has dementia. She's had it for years." Dementia. The word hung in the air between us. It wasn't the answer I was looking for. It wasn't an answer at all. It was a thief. All the anger I had nurtured for 40 decades, that burning coal of indignation I had kept warm in my chest, it suddenly had nowhere to go. You can't rage at a disease. You can't demand an apology from a memory that has crumbled to dust. A bitter, ironic laugh escaped my lips. So she gets to forget? She gets to cast me out and then live in a fog where she was never the villain, just a confused old woman? The rage flickered, and in its place, a different, more terrible emotion began to creep in. A deep, aching pity. I pictured her, not as the iron-willed matriarch who had judged me so harshly, but as a frightened woman, alone in a strange room, surrounded by faces she didn't know. My face, apparently, among them. I didn't even make a conscious decision to go. It was a physical compulsion, an invisible string pulling me eastward. I threw a few thins in an old duffel bag, my hands moving on their own. I had to see her. I had to look into her eyes and see for myself if there was anything left of the woman who gave me life and then took it away. The 40-year wound was no longer a clean cut. It was a messy, complicated disaster, and I was driving straight into the heart of it. Every mile that ticked by on the odometer was a mile closer to a confrontation I wasn't ready for. I felt like I was on the edge of a cliff, and the story was about to take a plunge. What was about to happen would redefine everything I thought I knew about my past. You can't afford to miss the moment this all comes to a head. The place was called Sunny Hills, a name so painfully cheerful it felt like a mockery. The building was a low, sprawling brick structure that looked more like a 1970s elementary school than a final stop in life's journey. I sat in my car for a full 5 minutes, my hands gripping the steering wheel, just breathing. Inhale, exhale. This was it. The moment of truth. The air inside hit me first. It was a sterile, layered scent of bleach, powdered soup, and a faint, sweetish odor of decay that clung to the back of my throat. A woman with a strained, professional smile sat behind a reception desk. I gave her my mother's name, Rose Winters, and it felt like I was talking about a stranger. "Room 21B, the receptionist said, pointing down a long, eerily quiet hallway. "Just down on the left." Walking down that hall was like moving through water. The silence was punctuated by the distant, tinny sound of a game show on a television, and the soft, rhythmic squeak of my own sensible shoes on the polished linoleum. Each identical door I passed felt like a judgment. I was an intruder here, a ghost from a life that had been packed away and forgotten. When I reached 21B, the door was slightly ajar. I paused, my heart hammering against my ribs, and peeked inside. There, in a worn armchair by the window, sat a woman. She was tiny, a small bird-like creature with a cloud of snow-white hair and shoulders that slumped forward as if carrying an invisible weight. She was watching a blue jay peck at something on the lawn, her head cocked with a look of simple, childlike fascination. My mind recoiled. The mother I carried in my memory was a tall, formidable woman with a straight spine and a gaze that can make you feel an inch tall. This frail creature in the chair, this wasn't her. It couldn't be. I pushed the door open. The slight creak of the hinges made her turn her head slowly. Her eyes, once sharp, piercing blue, were now pale and clouded over with a permanent state of confusion. She looked at me, taking in my face, my clothes, my nervous stance, and a polite, vacant smile touched her lips. "Well, hello there," she said, her voice soft and thin. "It's not Tuesday, is it? I thought the church volunteers only came on Tuesdays." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. A volunteer? That's all I was to her? A well-meaning stranger? I felt a wave of dizziness and grabbed the back of the visitor's chair to steady myself. I had to swallow twice before I could speak. "No," I said, my voice hoarse. I just came to see you, Mrs. Winters." She patted the seat of the chair next to her. "How very sweet of you, dear. Please, sit down." I sat, my mind screaming. Decades of anger, regret, and longing were swirling inside me, and I was sitting here making small talk with a woman who had no idea she had shattered my world. I knew then that words were useless. There was only one path left. I reached into my bag, my hands trembling slightly, and pulled out the worn stack of photographs I'd brought, my last and only hope. My hand was shaking as I held out the first photograph. It was a sun-faded image of a 7-year-old me, all pigtails and a gapped-toothed smile, perched on my mother's shoulders at the state fair. It was one of the few pictures I had where she was genuinely smiling. She took it from me, her movement slow and deliberate, and brought it close to her face. She stared at it for a long time, her thumb gently stroking the glossy surface. Oh my, what a happy day that must have been. She looked back at me, her eyes empty of recognition. That little girl is so full of joy. And her mother, she looks so proud. Her mother, not me. A small, hopeful part of me withered and died right there. I pushed on, my throat tight. Here's another one. I handed her a photo from my high school graduation. I was in my cap and gown, and she stood beside me, her expression stern, but with a hint of something soft around the eyes. "That's a lovely dress," was all she said, handing it back almost immediately. It was like talking to a wall, a polite, sweet, smiling wall. Each comment was a fresh stab of grief, reminding me that the woman I knew was truly gone. Defeated, I put the photos back in my bag. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the tick-tock of a small clock on her bedside table. I felt foolish. I had come all this way, armed with our shared history, only to find out that the history only existed for one of us. Then, in the quiet despair, a melody surfaced from the deepest part of my memory, a lullaby she used to sing to me every single night, her voice a low, comforting hum in the dark. "Sleep, my darling, close your eyes. I started humming it almost unconsciously. Then, finding a sliver of courage, I began to sing the words, my voice fragile and thin. Her hands, which had been restlessly fiddling with the loose thread on her sweater, grew still. Her head turned from the window, and she faced me directly. The cloudy veil in her eyes seemed to part for just a moment, replaced by an intense, searching gaze. It was the first time since I'd arrived that she was truly looking at me, not just observing a stranger. The air in the room grew thick, charged with an emotion I couldn't name. She slowly, so slowly, reached out her hand. Her skin was like dry parchment as her fingers brushed against my arm. Her touch was feather light, but it sent a shock wave through my entire body. She leaned forward slightly, her voice a raw, fragile whisper that cut straight through 40 years of pain. "You know," she said, her eyes swimming with a deep, sorrowful wonder, "you look so much like my daughter." I thought that was the moment. I thought that was the fractured, heartbreaking connection I had driven 300 miles to find. I was wrong. Fate had one more twist of the knife waiting for me, and what I would learn the next day was so much worse than being forgotten. It would make me question if I should have ever come back at all. The next morning, I returned to the nursing home feeling hollowed out. My mother's words, "You look so much like my daughter," echoed in my head. It was a connection, yes, but it was like touching a reflection in the water. The image was there, but the substance was gone. She was sleeping when I arrived, her breathing soft and shallow. A nurse was changing her sheets, and I felt a sudden, desperate need to make the room feel less like a sterile box and more like a home. To do something. "Do you mind if I just tidy up her closet a bit?" I asked the nurse, who just gave me another one of those practiced, pitying smiles, and nodded. The closet was small, containing only a few drab sweaters and a couple of worn-out housecoats. But in the back, tucked under a stack of thin, starchy blankets, my fingers brushed against the familiar, smooth surface of wood. I pulled it out. It was a small, rosewood box with a tarnished brass latch, a box I hadn't seen since I was a girl. It was where she kept her most precious things. My heart began to pound. I sat on the edge of the visitor's chair and lifted the lid. The scent of old cedar and dried flowers wafted out. On top lay a pair of my own bronzed baby shoes and a lock of my blonde hair from my first haircut, tied with a blue ribbon. But underneath that, my breath caught in my throat. Letters. Stacks and stacks of them, tied in faded bundles with silk ribbon. The envelopes were yellowed with age, and on the first one, in her elegant, looping handwriting, were 2 words. My Eleanor. My hands trembled as I untied the first bundle. The letters were dated, one for every birthday, one for every Christmas, for 40 years. I began to read. October 12th, 1984. My dearest Eleanor, it is your 24th birthday. I pray to a God I'm not sure I believe in anymore, that you are happy. My pride was a sin, my girl, a terrible, terrible sin. I hope one day you can forgive me. December 25th, 1990. I heard from Barbara that you have a daughter, Sarah. I said her name out loud in this empty house, and it sounded like a song. I would give anything, anything to see her. October 12th, 2005. You are 45 today. I wonder if your hair has any gray in it. I wonder if you still laugh with your whole body the way you did as a child. The silence in this house is my punishment. I deserve it. The words blurred as tears streamed down my face, dripping onto the brittle paper. The anger I had carried for a lifetime, the heavy shield I had used to protect myself, it didn't just crack, it dissolved into nothing. She hadn't been a monster of cold indifference. She had been a prisoner, locked in a cell of her own making, suffering a silent 40-year sentence. The injustice wasn't that she had forgotten me. It was that we had both been robbed of all this time by a single terrible moment of pride. I finally reached the last letter. It was from 2 years ago, just before she was moved to Sunny Hills. The beautiful looping handwriting was gone, replaced by a shaky, almost illegible scrawl. I am forgetting things now. Names, faces. Yesterday I couldn't remember how to work the stove. But the worst part, my Eleanor, is that I'm starting to forget your face. I try to picture you, but the edges are blurry. It's the cruelest trick of all, to lose you twice. I sank to the floor. The letters spread around me like fallen leaves. My grief was a physical weight, pressing the air from my lungs. She didn't lose me because of the dementia. She was already losing me to the slow, agonizing erosion of time and regret. And in that moment, holding 40 years of her silent love in my hands, I knew this story wasn't over. I had to give her back her words. It was the only thing left to do. I gathered the letters from the floor, my hands now steady with a clear and certain purpose. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my chest, but it was no longer a destructive force. It was a guide. I walked back to my mother's side. She was awake, her gaze fixed on that same bird hopping on the lawn, lost in her gentle, foggy world. I knelt beside her chair and took her hand in mine. It was cool and dry. "Mom?" I said, my voice soft but unwavering. She turned to look at me with her usual polite curiosity. "I found something of yours, and I think you need to hear it." I didn't wait for a response. I began to read. I read her own words back to her, my voice giving sound to 40 years of silent anguish. I read about her sinful pride, her lonely Christmases, her desperate wish to see her granddaughter. My voice cracked as I read about her seeing a stranger in a store and her heart stopping, just for a moment, because she thought it was me. I wasn't just reading letters, I was narrating the secret history of her heart. With each word, a subtle transformation took place. The slackness in her posture seemed to tighten. Her gaze, which had been wandering, became fixed on my face. She wasn't just a passive listener, she was absorbing her own forgotten soul. A single tear escaped from the corner of her eye and traced a slow, silver path down her wrinkled cheek. She was remembering. Not the events, not the dates, but the feeling, the crushing weight of her own regret. I reached the final letter, my voice dropping to a near whisper as I read the shaky, desperate words. "I am starting to forget your face, to lose you twice." The words hung in the quiet room, a shared epitaph for our lost years. I lowered the pages, my own vision blurred with tears. I looked up and met her eyes, and I saw it. The fog was gone. The clouds had parted. Looking back at me was not a confused old woman, not a polite stranger, but my mother. Her eyes were filled with a clarity so profound and so full of pain that it stole my breath. Her hand tightened around mine, a grip of surprising strength, a desperate anchor in a stormy sea. Her lips trembled, parting slightly. She took a shuddering breath, and then she spoke my name. It was not a question. It was not a discovery. It was a destination. Eleanor. The sound broke me. A sob tore from my throat, a sound of 40 years of pain and anger and longing being released all at once. "I'm here, Mom," I wept, leaning forward and resting my head on her shoulder, feeling its frailness. "I'm here. I know. It's okay. I know." We sat like that for a long time, hand in hand, as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the room. The silence was no longer empty. It was full, full of forgiveness, full of peace. I knew with a certainty that was sad and beautiful that this moment of clarity might not last. Tomorrow the fog might roll in again, and I might once again be a stranger with a kind face. But it didn't matter. For one perfect, heartbreaking afternoon, I had found my mother, and she had found me. We had bridged the gap of 40 years, and it was enough. It was everything.